The shuttle shook so hard that Cale Marin thought the bolts holding the walls together might give up before he did. He gripped the armrest and stared out the tiny window as the biggest space station he had ever seen filled his view. Valithar Galactic Academy. It was a ring of silver and crystal floating above a massive orange gas giant, and it was so large that clouds actually formed inside its outer sections. Cale had seen pictures, but pictures were nothing compared to the real thing. His shuttle, on the other hand, was not impressive. It was a patched-together Earth-built transport that the Galactic Union had approved only after 17 safety modifications and a prayer. When it docked at the station, the Port Authority held it for an extra 30 minutes because the automated system flagged it as unidentified debris before a living operator corrected the mistake. Cale grabbed his single bag, took a breath, and stepped through the airlock. The docking hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that small birds from some alien world actually flew between the support beams. The floor was made of something that looked like glass but felt warm under his boots. And standing along the walkways, staring at him, were hundreds of alien students. They were every shape and size he could imagine, and many he could not. Some were tall and thin, with skin that glowed. Others were short and covered in hard plates, like living armor. A few floated instead of walking. One creature near the back appeared to be a cloud of golden dust held together by its own willpower. Every single one of them was looking at the small, soft, plain-looking human walking through the hall with a canvas bag over his shoulder. Nobody said hello. The welcome assembly was held in a great hall with curved walls that changed color with the speaker's mood. Dean Savareth Clow stood at the center on a raised platform. He was a filly, which meant he was nearly 3 meters tall, thin as a tree, and covered in bioluminescent fronds that waved gently like seaweed in a current. His voice was deep and smooth, and it filled the room without any need for amplification. "We welcome all new students to Valithar," the dean said, his fronds glowing a polite blue. "This institution has shaped the finest minds in the galaxy for 12,000 years. Among you are representatives of civilizations that have mastered gravity, bent light, and mapped the spaces between dimensions." He paused and looked directly at Cale, who was sitting in the third row between a rock-like creature and something that smelled like fresh rain. "We also welcome our first human student, Cale Marin, from the planet Earth. Humanity achieved faster-than-light travel only 6 years ago, and we are pleased to include them in this cultural exchange. Their spirit is admirable." The way he said admirable made it sound like he was complimenting a child for tying its own shoes. Cale was assigned to cohort Zev-12. He learned very quickly that this was not a good thing. Cohorts were the Academy's way of grouping students into teams that trained, studied, and competed together. The best students were placed in the top cohorts. Cohort Zev-12 was the bottom. It was where the Academy put students who had no political connections, and apparently, students from species that the galaxy did not take seriously. His cohort mates were waiting in a small common room that had clearly not been cleaned in some time. There were 3 of them. Leothine was a Vesk, a reptilian species with green-black scales and 4 arms. She was tall and strong, but she sat in the corner with her arms folded tight against her body, and she barely made eye contact when Cale introduced himself. She was brilliant, he would learn later, but her anxiety made it nearly impossible for her to speak in groups larger than 3. Dren was a Karathi. He looked like someone had carved a man out of dark stone and then made him angry about it. He was massive, nearly as tall as the dean, and his body was made of dense silicon-based material that made the floor creak when he walked. He looked at Cale the way a boulder might look at a leaf. "So this is the human," Dren said. "Wonderful. They have sent us a pet." The third was Pip. Pip was a Mivari, an insectoid species about the size of a large dog. They had 6 legs, delicate wings folded against their back, and large dark eyes that reflected everything like polished glass. Pip said nothing. They simply watched. The next day, all new students were taken to a testing center for the standard aptitude scan. It was a quick process for most species. You sat in a chair, a beam of light passed over your head, and the system mapped your cognitive abilities, physical stats, and species classification. Students walked out with a neat little profile that told the academy exactly what they were good at. Kale sat in the chair. The beam passed over him. The machine hummed. Then it hummed again. Then it made a sound he was fairly sure machines were not supposed to make. The proctor, a thin amphibian creature with wide eyes, tapped the screen several times, frowned, and called over a colleague. They both stared at the results, whispered to each other, and then told Kale the scan was inconclusive and that he could go. Kale left feeling embarrassed, assuming the human brain was simply too primitive for their system to read properly. He did not know that the machine had not failed. It had returned results so far outside expected parameters that the system flagged them as a hardware error. That evening, Kale was walking back to the ZEV-12 common room through a quiet corridor, when he found his path blocked. 5 students stood in front of him. They were from Cohort Ascendant, the top-ranked group in the academy, and they were led by a Netheri named Torvon Skeld. Torvon was lean and elegant, with silver-white skin and eyes that glowed faintly violet. His species had telekinetic abilities, and he wore that fact the way some people wore expensive clothes. "The human," Torvon said, smiling in a way that had no warmth in it. "I wanted to see one up close. You are even smaller than I expected." Kale said nothing. "Tell me," Torvon continued, stepping closer, "how does it feel to know that your entire species will rise and fall in the time it takes mine to finish a university degree? Your lives are so short, it is almost sad." Kale still said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that silence made bullies uncomfortable. Torvon's smile faded. He raised one hand casually, and Kale felt the floor beneath him shift. A gravity trap. The tiles under his feet activated, and suddenly he was being pulled down with 4 times the normal force. His knees buckled. His bag hit the floor. The air was crushed out of his lungs, and his vision went dark at the edges. For most species at this academy, that was enough to pin them flat to the ground, helpless as an overturned insect. Kale's hands hit the floor. His arms shook. His spine screamed. And then, slowly, 1 centimeter at a time, he pushed himself up. He got one knee under him, then the other. He straightened his back. He picked up his bag, and he stood. The corridor was completely silent. Kale looked at Torvon. He did not say a word. He simply walked around the group, each step heavy and grinding under the impossible weight, and continued down the hallway until he turned the corner and disappeared. Nobody followed him. From a doorway at the far end of the corridor, Lyothine watched, with all 4 hands pressed against her mouth. Pip stood beside her, antennae trembling. "Did he just resist a gravity lock?" Lyothine whispered. Pip's dark eyes reflected the empty hallway where the human had stood. "His file says his planet's base gravity is already considered extreme," Pip said quietly. "I do not think they sent us a pet, Lyothine. I think they sent us something else entirely." Classes at Valathar were not like classes on Earth. There were no textbooks. There were no whiteboards. There were no professors standing at the front of a room talking while students took notes. Instead, lessons were delivered through neural pulse streams, beams of organized information sent directly into a student's brain through species-specific adapters. A Korathai could download an entire semester of quantum mechanics in 40 minutes. A Vesk could absorb advanced medical theory during lunch. Kale could do none of this. Human brains were not compatible with neural pulse technology. The adapters could not find a stable pathway into his neurons because, as one frustrated technician explained, the human brain was doing too many things at once and refusing to sit still. So while every other student at the academy absorbed knowledge like sponges dropped into an ocean, Kale had to learn the old way. He read, he asked questions, he wrote things down by hand on paper he had brought from Earth, because the academy did not stock paper. Some of his professors had never seen a student write by hand before. One of them asked if it was a religious ritual. Kale fell behind in almost every subject during those first 2 weeks. His professors were not cruel about it, but they were not surprised either. This was what they had expected from a human. A soft creature from a young species, doing its best, but simply not built for this level of education. Kale did not argue with them. He just kept reading, kept writing, and kept showing up. Then, the survival course happened. Every student at Phalethar was required to complete a module called Hostile Environment Navigation. The Academy had a massive simulation chamber in its lower levels that could recreate the conditions of almost any planet. For this test, the chamber was set to a Class 8 hostile biome, which meant toxic atmosphere, unstable ground, dangerous wildlife, and almost no visibility. Students were dropped in alone and had to navigate to an extraction point. If conditions became too dangerous, they could call for emergency pickup at any time. Most students called within the first 30 minutes. Kale was dropped into a swamp filled with thick green fog that burned the inside of his nose. The ground was soft and tried to swallow his boots with every step. Strange sounds came from every direction. Things moved in the fog, big things, and the temperature shifted between freezing cold and burning heat without warning. He walked through it like he was taking a stroll through a park on a cloudy day. This was not bravery. This was familiarity. Earth was a planet where the weather could kill you. The animals could kill you. The plants could kill you. The water could kill you. And the ground itself could open up and kill you. Kale had grown up camping in forests where bears lived. He had trained as a combat medic in deserts where the daytime heat could cook an egg on a rock. A simulated swamp with some fog and a few predators was, by Earth standards, a slightly unpleasant Tuesday. He identified toxic plants by their smell and avoided them. He built a simple water filter from his bootlace, a piece of cloth, and some charcoal he scraped from a burned tree. When a simulated predator lunged at him from the fog, he sidestepped, jammed a sharpened stick into its sensor array, and kept walking. At one point he cut his arm on a jagged rock. He cleaned the wound with purified water, pressed the edges together, and cauterized it with a heated piece of metal from his belt buckle. He did not make a sound while doing this. He was the only student that day who reached the extraction point without calling for help. He was also the only student who went back in. He had heard Pip's distress signal on his communicator just before reaching the exit. The small Mivari had fallen into a crevice and broken 2 of their legs. They were too proud and too stubborn to call for extraction, but they could not climb out. Kale found them at the bottom of the crack, shivering and silent, their dark eyes wide with pain. "I do not need help," Pip said. "I know," Kale replied. He climbed down, gently lifted Pip onto his back, climbed out, and carried them to the extraction point. Pip weighed almost nothing. Kale treated the broken legs with splints made from sticks and strips of his own shirt before the medical team arrived. The medical team stared at the splints. They had never seen field medicine performed with sticks and cloth before. In the medical bay, while Pip was being treated, the Academy's chief physician decided to run a full scan on Kale. Dr. Thesson was a quellar, a species that resembled a tall, thin bird covered in silver feathers. She had been a doctor for 200 years, and thought she had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. She was wrong. She ran the scan 3 times because she did not believe the first 2. Human biology, as it turned out, was horrifying. Kale's digestive system used hydrochloric acid strong enough to dissolve metal. His immune system did not simply fight infection. It launched a full-scale war against invaders, raising his body temperature to burn them out, and flooding damaged areas with inflammation that destroyed friendly tissue along with the enemy, then simply rebuilt everything afterward. His bones, when broken, healed back stronger than before. His muscles, when torn, grew back thicker. His cardiovascular system could sustain physical activity at moderate intensity for hours, something no other known species could match. Most galactic species were built for short bursts of speed or strength. Humans were built to just keep going, forever, until the thing they were chasing fell down and died of exhaustion. Dr. Thesson sat in her office for a long time after reading the results. Then she opened Kale's species file and changed his classification from pre-developmental to Class 12 Apex Persistence Predator, Death World Origin. She flagged the file as restricted and sent a copy to the dean. She told no one else. Kale, completely unaware that he had just been reclassified as one of the most dangerous biological organisms in the known galaxy, went back to his common room and tried to help his cohort study for their next exam. His method of studying was considered bizarre. He read things over and over again until they stuck. He made connections between subjects by using analogies and stories. He drew diagrams. He explained concepts out loud, sometimes arguing with himself when he got confused. It was messy, slow, and completely alien to the others, who were used to having information poured directly into their minds. But it worked. Dren had failed the quantum navigation module twice. The neuropulse lessons gave him the data, but not the understanding. Kale sat with him for 3 hours, using rocks and pieces of fruit to explain spatial folding in a way Dren could actually grasp. Dren passed the module the next day with the highest score he had ever received. He did not thank Kale, but he stopped calling him a pet. That evening, Kale pulled out a small bag of brown powder from his luggage and mixed it with hot water from the common room dispenser. The smell filled the room immediately, rich and dark and bitter and warm. Liathine leaned forward, her nostrils flaring. "What is that?" she asked. "Coffee," Kale said. "It is a drink from Earth. Well, a synthesized version. The real thing is better, but this is close enough." He poured cups for everyone. Liathine sipped it carefully, and her eyes went wide. Pip dipped one antenna into the liquid and vibrated with something that might have been pleasure. Dren grabbed the cup, drank the entire thing in one gulp, and then sat very still for about 10 seconds. "Why is my heart beating faster?" Dren asked, his stone-like face showing the first expression Kale had ever seen on it, something between alarm and delight. "That is the caffeine," Kale said. "It is a mild stimulant." "Mild?" Dren's eyes were very wide. "This is a weapon. This is a war drug." "Your species drinks this every morning," Kale said. "Sometimes 2 or 3 times a morning," Kale said. Dren stared at him with something that was not quite fear and not quite respect, but was definitely no longer contempt. That night, in the dean's private chambers high above the academy, Savareth Quo read Dr. Thesson's report. His bioluminescent fronds, which normally glowed a calm blue, flickered and dimmed until they were almost dark. This was the Philly equivalent of a man going pale with shock. He set the medical report aside and opened a classified file on his personal terminal. It was a Galactic Council document, restricted to the highest levels of government, and its title was simple: Humanity, Preliminary Threat Assessment. It was 5,000 pages long. The dean began to read. With every page, his fronds grew darker. He had invited this species into his academy. He had put their representative in the lowest cohort, and treated him like a curiosity, a harmless novelty from a backward world. He was beginning to realize that this might have been the greatest mistake of his very long career. The announcement came on a cold morning during the station's artificial dawn cycle. Midterm evaluations were in 10 days. Every cohort would compete in the Crucible Trials, a series of live-fire tactical simulations that tested combat awareness, leadership, teamwork, and the ability to think under pressure. The cohort that finished last would be dissolved. Its members would be expelled from the academy and sent home. Cohort ZEV-12 had been ranked last for 2 semesters in a row. Kale sat in the common room with his cohort mates and watched the information scroll across the display screen. Nobody spoke for a long time. Dren's stone fingers tightened around the edge of the table until the metal groaned. Lyathine's forearms were wrapped around herself so tight that her scales creaked. Pip sat on a shelf near the ceiling, perfectly still, their dark eyes reflecting the screen. "We are going to be expelled," Dren said flatly. "Maybe not," Kale said. "We are the worst cohort in the academy. We have been the worst cohort for longer than you have been alive. How exactly do you propose we avoid being expelled?" Kale leaned forward. "By not fighting the way they expect us to fight." Over the next 3 days, Kale did something that no student at Vailithar had ever done before. He went to the Academy's archive and pulled every recorded Crucible trial from the last 200 years. He watched them all. He studied the patterns, the tactics, the outcomes, and he found something interesting. Every species fought according to its biology. The Netheri used their telekinetic powers to control the field. The Karathi used brute force to overwhelm opponents. The Vesk used their speed and extra limbs to outmaneuver. The Quellar used their superior senses to detect threats before they arrived. Every cohort, every year, fought the way their species was built to fight. And the Academy's simulation AI adapted to these patterns. It learned what to expect, and it adjusted the difficulty accordingly. Nobody had ever introduced something the AI had not seen before. Nobody had ever fought like a human. Kale called a meeting in the common room and laid out his plan. He would teach them human combat doctrine, not the advanced military tactics of Earth's great armies, but something older and more fundamental. Guerrilla warfare, ambush tactics, misdirection, the art of making your enemy think you are weak so that they make mistakes, and the most terrifying strategy in humanity's long and violent history, the one that predated every weapon and every technology, endurance pursuit. Humans do not overpower their prey, Kale explained. We are not the fastest or the strongest. We never were. What we do is follow. We pick a target and we follow it. When it runs, we walk. When it hides, we find it. When it rests, we catch up. We do this for hours, for days, until the thing we are chasing is so exhausted that it falls down and cannot get up again. And then we are there. The room was very quiet. That is the most disturbing thing I have ever heard, Dren said. It works, Kale said simply. He trained them for 7 days. 7 days of drilling tactics that no species in the galaxy had ever seen. He taught Pip how to use their small size as an advantage, slipping through spaces too tight for anyone else, planting distractions, and disrupting enemy systems from the inside. He taught Dren to stop using his strength like a hammer, and start using it like a wall, holding positions and blocking paths so that enemies were funneled into traps. He taught Leothine that her 4 arms could operate 2 separate console systems simultaneously, something no other species could do without splitting their attention, and that this gave her a tactical advantage that no one would expect. And he taught all of them the hardest lesson of all, how to lose ground on purpose. In galactic doctrine, retreat is failure, Kale told them during a late-night session. On Earth, retreat is a weapon. You fall back, You let the enemy think they are winning, you let them spread out and get confident. And then you hit them from a direction they forgot to watch. Leothine struggled the most, not with the tactics, which she understood immediately, but with the confidence needed to execute them. Her anxiety made her freeze at critical moments. Kale worked with her separately, not pushing her to overcome her fear, but teaching her to work alongside it. You do not need to stop being afraid. You just need to act while you are afraid. That is what bravery actually is. The Crucible trials began on a Tuesday. The simulation chamber was transformed into a massive arena, a ruined city under a dark sky, filled with obstacles, elevated platforms, and hidden passages. Cohorts were matched against each other in elimination rounds. The matches were broadcast to the entire academy. Cohort ZEV-12 was matched first against Cohort Prin-8, a solid mid-tier group that expected an easy win. They deployed in a standard formation, spreading out to control key positions and waiting for ZEV-12 to walk into their trap. ZEV-12 did not walk into their trap. They disappeared. Kale had taught his team to move like ghosts. Pip crawled through a ventilation duct and disabled Prin-8's communication relay from the inside. Dren positioned himself at a narrow choke point and became an immovable wall that 3 Prin-8 members could not push past. Leothine, hidden in a control room she had reached through an unmonitored access tunnel, took over the arena's lighting grid and plunged Prin-8's positions into darkness. And Kale ran. He let himself be seen. He let Prin-8's fastest members spot him and give chase. And he ran, not at full speed, but at a steady, relentless pace that stayed just out of their reach. He ran for 40 minutes. 40 minutes through rubble and rain and broken streets, always just ahead, never stopping, never slowing down. One by one his pursuers fell behind. Their species were built for bursts of speed, not sustained effort. After 40 minutes, they were gasping and stumbling and spread across half the arena, completely out of position. ZEV-12 picked them off one by one. The match was over in under an hour. The spectators did not know what to make of it. The lowest cohort in the academy had just dismantled a mid-tier team without taking a single casualty. The commentators scrambled to explain what had happened. They could not, because nothing like it had ever happened before. The second round was different. Cohort ZEV-12 was matched against Cohort Ascendant, against Torvon Skeld. Torvon was not stupid. He had watched ZEV-12's first match, and he had adjusted. He kept his team tight, refused to chase Kale, and used his telekinetic abilities to control the battlefield from the central position. When Pip tried to infiltrate through the vents, Torvon sealed them with a thought. When Dren tried to hold a choke point, Torvon lifted him off the ground and set him aside like a piece of furniture. Then Torvon focused on Kale. The first telekinetic blast caught Kale in the chest and threw him into a concrete wall. Something cracked. Pain exploded through his ribs, and white light filled his vision. He hit the ground and tasted blood. He got up. Torvon hit him again, harder this time. Kale flew backward, rolled across broken stone, and slammed into a metal beam. 2 ribs, definitely broken now. His left arm was not moving properly. He got up. The arena had gone quiet. Every student watching, every professor, every dignitary in the observation gallery was staring at the human who kept standing up after being hit by forces that should have ended the fight. Torvon hit him a 3rd time. Kale went down. He stayed down for 3 seconds. Then his fingers curled against the ground. His arms shook. Blood dripped from a cut above his eye. He got up. Something changed in the arena. Not in the simulation, not in the tactics, but in the air itself. Because every species watching had some version of a predator in their evolutionary history, some ancient memory of being hunted by something that would not stop. And every single one of them felt that old fear stir as they watched the human rise again and again and again. Torvald's concentration wavered, just for a moment, just for 1 second. His telekinetic field shifted as something old and deep in his brain whispered that this thing in front of him was not going to stop, and maybe he should be the one to run. 1 second was enough. Leothine struck from behind. She had been moving through the shadows, while every eye was on Kale, and she hit the blind spot in Torvald's telekinetic field exactly where Kale had taught her it would be. Her forearms moved in perfect coordination, disabling his shield generator and tagging him for elimination in a single fluid motion. The arena system chimed. Torvald Skeld, eliminated. Without their leader, Cohort Ascendant fell apart in minutes. Dren broke through their line. Pip disabled their last communication node. The final members surrendered. Cohort Zev-12 had won. The arena erupted. Students were on their feet, screaming and shouting and making sounds that Kale did not have names for. Dren lifted Pip onto his shoulder and roared so loud that the observation gallery windows vibrated. In the wreckage of the arena, Torvald Skeld stood up and walked toward Kale. His silver face was unreadable. Kale waited, expecting anger or threats or some final insult. Torvald stopped in front of him. Kale held out his hand. "Good fight," he said. Torvald stared at the hand. He stared for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Up in the observation gallery, Dean Savareth QO watched the handshake. His fronds, for the first time since Kale Marin had arrived at his academy, glowed warm. It happened at night, during the station's sleep cycle, when the lights were dim and the corridors were mostly empty. A deep, heavy sound rolled through the academy like the groan of a wounded animal. The floor vibrated, lights flickered, and then every alarm on the station went off at once. Kale was out of bed before the alarm finished its first cycle. He had been a combat medic on Earth, and the part of his brain that handled emergencies had never fully gone to sleep. He was dressed and in the hallway in 30 seconds. Dren was right behind him, his heavy stone body making the floor shake with every step. Leothine came out next, her forearms already pulling her gear on. Pip dropped from a ceiling vent and landed on Kale's shoulder without a word. The station's emergency broadcast filled the corridor. A catastrophic failure in the outer ring. Sector 7, the residential wing that housed junior representatives and diplomatic families, had suffered a hull breach. Multiple sections were losing atmosphere. Emergency bulkheads had failed to seal. 46 individuals were trapped inside, including children. And then came the part that made Kale's blood go cold. The station's rescue drones were offline, a system malfunction, possibly related to the same failure that caused the breach. Professional emergency crews were being dispatched from the nearest Union outpost. Estimated arrival, 90 minutes. 90 minutes, in a section that was losing air. Around Kale, students and staff were following emergency protocols. They were moving to designated safe zones, checking in with their cohort leaders, and waiting. This was what the protocol said to do. Wait for the professionals. Do not enter dangerous areas. Stay calm and stay put. Kale was already running. He sprinted through the corridors towards Sector 7, with his cohort behind him. A security officer stepped into his path near the access junction and held up one hand. This area is restricted. Emergency teams are en route. All students must return to safe zones. How long until they get here? Kale asked. Approximately 87 minutes. Those people do not have 87 minutes. Protocol requires that we wait for trained personnel to handle the situation. I cannot allow you to enter. Kale looked at the officer. There are kids in there, he said. I am going. He went around the officer and kept running. The officer stood in the corridor, shocked, because in 12,000 years of academy history, no student had ever simply ignored an emergency protocol and walked into a disaster zone. Sector 7 was a nightmare. The outer sections had lost atmosphere completely and were open to the vacuum of space. Inner sections still had air, but were filling with radiation from damaged power conduits. The structural supports were failing, and entire corridors were collapsing as the station's frame twisted from the breach. It was the kind of environment that killed quickly and without mercy. Kale assessed the situation in seconds. There were 3 possible routes to the trapped residents. The first went through flooded radiation zones. The second was blocked by collapsed structure. The third went through hard vacuum. He looked at his team. Dren, there is a support beam failing in Corridor 12. If it goes, the entire inner section collapses. I need you to hold it. For how long? Dren asked. As long as it takes. Dren nodded and moved. He found the beam, a massive piece of station framework that was buckling under the stress of the breach, and he put his body under it. His silicon-based form was one of the hardest materials in the known galaxy. He spread his legs, set his shoulders, and held. The beam weighed more than most vehicles. It did not matter. Dren held. Pip, Kale said, the ventilation system connects to rooms 4 through 9. You are the only one small enough to fit. Get in there and guide anyone you find toward the emergency exits on the inner wall. Pip did not hesitate. They folded their wings tight against their body and crawled into a vent opening that was barely wider than a human fist. They disappeared into the darkness, moving fast and silent through passages that no other being in the academy could have navigated. Leothine, Kale said, and he looked at her carefully. Her scales were pale. Her 4 hands were shaking. Her anxiety was a living thing that wrapped around her chest and squeezed. She was terrified. I need you to take over communications. The emergency channel is chaos. Someone has to coordinate this, tell people where to go and how to get there. You are the smartest person I know, and you can operate 4 systems at once. I need you to be the voice that guides everyone out. I cannot, she whispered. There are too many people. I cannot speak to that many. You can, he said. You do not have to stop being scared. You just have to talk while you are scared. She stared at him. Then she closed her eyes, took 1 breath, and opened them again. She moved to the communication panel, placed all 4 hands on the controls, and began to speak. Her voice shook at first. Then it steadied. Then it became the clearest, calmest voice on the entire emergency channel, directing trapped students and families towards safe routes with a precision that would later be described as extraordinary. Kale took the vacuum route. He grabbed a thin emergency suit from a wall locker. It was rated for 2 minutes of vacuum exposure. The route to the final group of trapped residents would take at least 4. He put the suit on and stepped through the airlock. Space tried to kill him immediately. The cold was beyond anything he had ever felt. A cold that went past his skin and into his bones, and tried to freeze his blood in his veins. The suit's air supply was a tiny thing that fed him just enough oxygen to keep conscious. His exposed skin at the suit's joints began to swell as the vacuum pulled at his body. His vision went gray at the edges. His ears roared. He kept walking. 4.5 minutes in hard vacuum. The medical text said that a human could survive about 90 seconds of vacuum exposure before permanent damage set in. Kale survived 4.5 minutes through nothing but willpower and the stubborn refusal of a death-world organism to die when the universe told it to. He reached the sealed bulkhead on the other side, gripped the manual release with fingers that could barely close, and cranked it open. Behind the bulkhead, 31 people were huddled in the dark. They stared at the frost-covered human in the torn emergency suit who had just walked through open space to reach them. Kale pointed toward the inner corridor. "Move," he said. "Now, follow the lights." They moved. Leothane's voice guided them through the safe corridors, while Pip opened sealed vents ahead of them, and Dren held the structural beam that kept the ceiling from crushing them all. One by one, the trapped residents made it to safety. 31 through the vacuum route, 15 guided by Pip through the vents, 46 people, all accounted for. All except one. The last was a child, a filly youngling, barely a meter tall, with tiny fronds that flickered with weak, frightened light. She was beyond the final failing bulkhead, in a room that was flooded with radiation from a cracked power conduit. The radiation levels were enough to kill most species in minutes. Kale did not hesitate. He walked through the radiation corridor, found the child curled in a corner, with her fronds dark from fear, picked her up, held her against his chest, and walked back out. The radiation burned through his suit and into his body. He could feel it, a strange hot tingling that settled into his bones like a poison. He made it back to the safe zone. He handed the child to Dr. Thesson, who was waiting with a medical team. The little filly's fronds flickered and then glowed warm as she was wrapped in a thermal blanket. Kale looked at Dr. Thesson. He opened his mouth to say something. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. His heart stopped for 9 seconds. In those 9 seconds, Dr. Thesson and her team fought to restart it with every tool they had. They used electrical stimulation, chemical injections, and direct cardiac massage. Nothing worked for 8 of those seconds. On the 9th second, Kale's heart restarted on its own. His death-world body, built by millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill everything on it every single day, simply refused to stop. His heart beat once, then again, then settled into a steady rhythm that made Dr. Thesson sit back on her heels and stare at the ceiling for a very long time. Kale was moved to the critical care ward. He was unconscious, burned by radiation, damaged by vacuum exposure, and running a fever so high that it would have killed a Netheri twice over. His body was already healing. His immune system had declared total war on the radiation damage, and was rebuilding tissue at a rate that made the medical monitors beep in confusion. Cohort Sev-12 refused to leave. Dren sat beside the bed, his massive stone body wedged into a chair that was far too small for him. His hands, which had held a collapsing beam for 11 minutes, were cracked and chipped. Leothine sat on the other side, the filly child asleep on her lap. The little girl had refused to leave the room where the human was, and Leothine had not had the heart to make her go. Pip was perched on the headboard of the bed, their antenna gently touching Kale's hair, in a gesture that, for a Mivari, was the deepest expression of bond. Torvald Skeld stood outside the door of the medical bay. He did not come in. But when a group of upper-year students tried to crowd the hallway to catch a glimpse of the human, Torvald looked at them with his glowing violet eyes and said, very quietly, "Leave. Now." They left. Dren sat in the silence of the medical bay and watched the human breathe. The monitors beeped steadily. The fever was dropping. The radiation damage was being repaired, cell by cell. "You die here," Dren said softly, his deep voice barely above a whisper, "and I will never forgive your stupid species." The station's emergency was contained. The hull breach was sealed by repair drones that finally came online. The professional rescue teams arrived and found that 46 people had already been saved by 4 students and a human who had walked through space. Near dawn, Kale opened his eyes. The light was too bright and everything hurt, and his mouth tasted like metal. He blinked slowly, and the first thing he saw was the filly child, small and warm, asleep on Leothine's lap in the chair beside him. Her tiny fronds glowed a soft, peaceful blue. Kale smiled. Then he winced because smiling hurt. Then he looked at Dren and Leothine and Pip and said, in a voice rough as gravel, "So, did I pass the midterms?" Dren made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was the first time anyone had ever heard a Korathi laugh. 3 weeks passed. Kale healed faster than anyone expected, which by now should not have surprised anyone but still did. His bones knit themselves back together. The radiation damage, which should have left permanent scars on his internal organs, faded as his immune system hunted down every damaged cell and replaced it with a new one. Dr. Thesson ran scans every day, and every day she shook her feathered head and muttered things under her breath about evolutionary biology and the unfairness of the universe. Kale spent most of his recovery reading. Leothine brought him materials from the Academy archive. Dren brought him food, always too much, because the Korathi concept of a healing meal was apparently enough to feed a small army. Pip sat on his pillow and read over his shoulder, occasionally clicking their mandibles when they disagreed with something in the text. The Philly child, whose name was Sonara, visited every afternoon with her diplomatic family. She would climb onto the foot of Kale's bed, curl up like a cat, and let her fronds glow warm while she napped. Kale never asked her to leave. By the end of the 3rd week, Kale was on his feet and walking the halls again. Students who had once looked at him with contempt or pity now stepped aside when he passed. Not out of fear exactly, but out of something closer to respect. A few nodded to him. 1 or 2 even said hello. The assembly was announced on a morning when the artificial sun was set to a particularly golden shade, as if even the station itself knew that something important was about to happen. Every student, professor, staff member, and visiting dignitary was required to attend. The great hall was full in a way it had not been in years. Beings of 300 species packed the curved walls and filled every seat and standing space. The air hummed with whispered conversations in dozens of languages. Dean Savareth Quo walked to the center of the raised platform. His bioluminescent fronds glowed a deep, steady blue, the color of serious purpose. The hall went silent. He began by speaking about the Academy, about its 12,000 years of history, about the civilizations it had shaped and the leaders it had produced. He spoke about tradition, about standards, about the careful systems that had been built over millennia to identify talent and potential across 300 species. Then he stopped. He stood in silence for a moment that stretched long enough to make the audience uncomfortable. And then Savareth Quo did something that no Thilly elder had done in recorded history. He admitted, publicly and without reservation, that he had been wrong. When humanity was granted a seat at this academy, he said, I treated it as a formality. I placed their representative in our lowest cohort. I expected nothing from him. I assumed, as many of you did, that a species so young, so fragile, so new to the stars, could not possibly have anything to teach an institution as old as ours. His fronds shifted color, moving from blue to a deep amber that pulsed with something raw and honest. I was wrong, completely and profoundly wrong. He spoke about the survival course, about a human who walked through a simulated death world as though it were his backyard, and then went back in to carry out a fallen comrade. He spoke about the crucible trials, about a cohort that had been written off by every measure the Academy had, and how a human taught them to fight in ways that 12,000 years of galactic military doctrine had never imagined. He spoke about Sector 7, about a student who ignored every protocol, walked through hard vacuum, pushed through lethal radiation, and carried a child out of the dark while his own heart was failing. Then the dean reached below his podium and held up a data tablet. The screen displayed a document that Kale had never seen, but that made several high-ranking officials in the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. This, the dean said, is the Galactic Council's classified threat assessment on humanity. It is 5,000 pages long. It catalogs human endurance, aggression, adaptability, and biological resilience in exhaustive detail. It measures everything humans are capable of destroying. He held the tablet over the recycler unit built into the podium. It fails to measure what they will endure to protect. He dropped the tablet. It dissolved into light and was gone. The hall was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Dren, sitting in the 4th row with his cracked stone hands resting on his knees, brought those hands together in a thunderous clap that shook the seats around him. Pip joined in, their wings buzzing at a frequency that harmonized with the sound. Leothine stood up, all 4 arms applauding, and for the first time in her life, she did not care that every eye in the room turned to look at her. Torvald Skeld rose to his feet in the section reserved for cohort ascendant and clapped with a slow, deliberate rhythm that his cohort mates quickly matched. The applause spread. It rolled through the great hall like a wave, rising from every species and every section until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with it. Kale sat in his seat and stared at his hands, because he did not know where else to look. The Galactic Council, responding to the Academy's detailed report on the Sector 7 incident and the Crucible trials, had voted to reclassify humanity. The old designation of pre-developmental civilization was struck from the record. In its place, humanity was now listed as an emergent apex collaborative species, a classification that recognized not only their biological capabilities, but their instinct to cooperate, to protect, and to bond with others, regardless of species boundaries. Earth was granted 5 additional Academy seats, beginning the following year. Cohort Zev-12 was promoted from the bottom tier to mid-level standing, but the promotion felt almost beside the point. They had become something far more important than a ranking. They had become a unit in the truest sense, 4 beings from 4 different species who trusted each other completely, and who had proven that trust in fire and vacuum and blood. In the days that followed, things changed in small ways that added up to something large. Dren enrolled in a human history course. He told Kale it was because he wanted to understand how a species that had been killing each other for their entire existence had also managed to build art and music and literature that made a stone-hearted Korathi feel things he did not have words for. Pip, who had not contacted their hive collective in over a year, sent a message home. It was short. It said that they had found a new collective, and that the human who led it had carried them out of a jungle on his back. The hive collective sent back a single word that translated roughly to good. For a Mivari, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Leothine submitted a research thesis to the Academy's scientific journal. It was titled Pack Bonding Behavior in Humans and Its Effects on Multi-Species Cohort Performance. It examined how humans formed deep emotional attachments, not only with members of their own species, but with anyone and anything they spent enough time with, and how this bonding instinct created loyalty and cohesion that no formal training program could replicate. The thesis became the most downloaded paper on the Academy network within 3 days. Professors from 6 different departments requested follow-up studies. Leothine, who had once been unable to speak in front of a group, presented her findings to a lecture hall of 400. Her voice only shook once, at the beginning, and she smiled through it. Torvald Skeld submitted a formal request to transfer out of Cohort Ascendant. He wanted to join Cohort Zev-12. The request was unusual enough that it was escalated to the Dean, who approved it without hesitation. When Torvald's former cohort mates asked him why he would leave the top-ranked group for a cohort of misfits, he answered simply, "Because I have spent my entire life in a cohort that teaches me how to win. I want to be in a cohort that teaches me why winning matters." On the night after the assembly, during the station's quiet hours, when the artificial stars were set to a soft glow, Kale stood alone on the observation deck. The great window curved in front of him, and through it he could see the gas giant Thyra 9, its orange and gold bands swirling in slow, massive storms that had been raging for longer than human civilization had existed. Beyond the planet, the stars stretched out in every direction, more than he could count, more than he could name, each one a sun with its own worlds and its own stories. He heard footsteps behind him. Leothine came to stand beside him at the window. She was quiet for a while, looking at the same stars. "Are you proud," she asked, "of what you have done here?" Cale thought about it. He thought about the gravity trap in the corridor, and the swamp in the simulation, and the crucible arena, and the frozen silence of hard vacuum, and the weight of a small filly child in his arms. He shook his head. "I did not do anything special," he said. "Back home, anyone would have done the same." Leothine turned to look at him. She studied his face for a long time, with her golden reptilian eyes, the same eyes that had watched him stand up under 4 times normal gravity on his very first day. She had spent weeks researching human behavior, writing a thesis about their impossible ability to bond with anything and everything, documenting their refusal to leave the fallen behind. She understood humans better than almost anyone in the galaxy now, and she knew that Cale was telling the truth. He was not being humble. He was not being modest. He genuinely believed that what he had done was ordinary, that any human would have walked through vacuum for a stranger, that any human would have gotten up after being knocked down, that any human would have gone back into the fire. That was the thing about humans, the thing that no threat assessment could capture, and no classification system could measure. They did not think they were remarkable. They looked at the extraordinary things they did and called them normal. They shrugged at their own miracles. "Cale," Leothine said quietly, "that is exactly what makes your species terrifying." It hurt his ribs a little, but he laughed anyway, because laughing when things hurt was another thing humans did that the galaxy would never quite understand. They stood together at the window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting a very ordinary yellow sun, 7 billion more humans were going about their lives, completely unaware that the galaxy had finally noticed them. They were waking up and going to work, and loving each other, and arguing with each other, and building things, and breaking things, and stubbornly, relentlessly, beautifully refusing to give up on anything or anyone, the way they always had and always would. The galaxy had spent 12,000 years building systems to identify threats. It had cataloged claws and venom and psychic abilities and faster-than-light warships. It had measured every kind of strength and every kind of danger. But it had never thought to measure the one thing that made humanity extraordinary above all others: the quiet, stubborn, irrational, and completely beautiful refusal to leave anyone behind.